Hello and welcome to another episode of The Lantern's Quest. Pastor Lucas, we've actually made it to episode 40. We probably should have had streamers and things going. I don't know, 40 seems like a good number, right? Um,
Hooray, hooray, we made it. We made it.
anyway, yeah, episode 40 of our Lantern's Quest and our Exploring the Sketchbook of Christ. We're glad that you're joining us live or viewing this at a later time, and would love to hear comments from you and questions and interact with you that way. But let me start off by just mentioning you saw Bradford Christian College in the opening slides there. One of our sponsors, bradfordchristiancollege.com, is the website you can go to find out more information, ask questions, and find out about the different bachelor degree programs and the Master of Arts in Theology. And also, I'll just mention that if you enroll in a program with Bradford Christian College before July 1st, you will lock in the current rate per credit rate, and you'll lock that price in for your whole program, right? So all 4 years of your program will be at the rate it is now. July 1st, those rates will increase. And so I encourage you, if you're thinking about Bradford Christian College, this is a perfect time to get enrolled in a program. Um, and you can take advantage of this opportunity to lock in current rates for the entirety of your program. Well, as you can see, if you're a regular viewer, Pastor David Barrett is not with us tonight, a little under the weather, I understand. So praying for him that he recovers from whatever has got him knocked down. But we do have Pastor Lucas back, who's overcome his technical issues from the previous week. So welcome back, Pastor
Yeah,
Lucas. And Pastor Lucas with
praise the Lord.
Reformation Bible Presbyterian Church. I stumbled there for a moment. And anything you want to share from what's going on in your circle with your church or other things that you might be a part of?
Yeah, well, we have come out of one wilderness wandering into another, so now we're moving into the into the home, and so we had a really good home fellowship this last week. It was getting a little dicey at the park because the the section that we were meeting in was getting or reserved. But not only was it getting reserved, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was just getting hard to find like a spot. There was like three or four families that hadn't reserved that were showing up and having big parties, and not necessarily a bad thing, but I was thinking, well, we might need to get a little bit more secure location.
Sure.
So we're meeting in the home, and everybody's welcome in our home.
Right. Yeah. And I guess in that regard, if you want to think of it as a positive, it means that your Sunday live stream is back up because you're in a
And we
location
can
where you
live
can do
stream.
that live stream. So,
That's
um,
true. Yeah.
and so I would encourage any viewers, Reformation Bible Presbyterian Church and Wellsprings Church, where David serves as the pastor. Links to their websites are in the description below, and you can visit those websites. You can find out more information, and you can see past services there and get a sense of what it is that's happening at those churches as far as, in particular, the diligent and faithful preaching of the word for those who attend. So I encourage you to check that out by visiting their websites. Okay. Last week, Pastor Lucas, you weren't able to be with us. We did a reaction time and got into the exciting world of UFOs and things. And I would encourage people to view that video. You can go to the Bradford Christian College YouTube channel, click on playlists, and you'll find a reaction time playlist. And so you can find that episode there. And I would encourage in particular, any Christian who's wondering about, the alleged UFO extraterrestrial release from the government and such. I think if you spend a little time with it, you'll find it's just pretty much things that we don't know right now what they are. But I think that in particular in that episode, David gave a really nice summary idea at the end of that episode that I think can be really helpful for Christians to think through and not get all certainly too emotionally or otherwise caught up in the um, whatever the propaganda or whatever that it is. So this week we're going to return to Mark and continue exploring a sketchbook of Christ. And I think the last time we did talk at least some about this circumstance in Mark chapter 10, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, asking the question of Jesus. We talked some about that, but I'm not sure that we talked about the whole of it, the whole of that passage. But they asked this question about being granted the opportunity to sit on the right hand and the left hand of Jesus in his glory. And Jesus returned their question with a question, or their request with a question. And Lucas, maybe we'll start here at verse 38. And when Jesus
Sure.
says to them, "Ye know not what ye ask. Can you drink of the cup that I drink of and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" And they said to him, "We can." And Jesus said to them, "You shall indeed drink of the cup that I drink of, and with the baptism that I am baptized with shall you be baptized." Um,
Right.
so let's talk about those two verses, and maybe you can give some clarity on this cup to be drank of and the baptism. What is it that's being talked about here?
Well, first off, I'd like to say that this verse 38, where he says, "Baptized with the baptism that I'm to be baptized with," we have to stop and think possibly that he's not talking actually about baptism, and maybe the disciples falsely think in verse 39 that he's talking about baptism. And I mean, like, in a literal sense, that are you able to be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? Well, he's already baptized. And if you think back to chapter 1, it was with water, right? And so the answer is clearly, well, certainly everybody is, right, Jesus? But because of the way he asked the question, you have to wonder, maybe he's talking about something else here. There are those Baptist friends of mine, and I'm no longer of this camp. Was raised, in this Baptist sort of understanding that baptism always means immersed, that you're always immersed. Well, clearly, clearly that's not what baptism means. Here he's talking about something maybe analogous to baptism, but he's talking about something else. Well, we've already seen in chapter 9 that, not even in chapter 9, just a few verses before, he says they're going to mock him, scourge him, spit on him, kill him, right? So if you're looking at the context, clearly he's talking about a baptism of suffering. Like, you're going to be inundated. Let's use that for a second. Inundated, sprinkled. You're going to be initiated into suffering, right? And I think that's clearly what he's talking about, that the cup that he's going to drink is not a cup of gladness, a cup of privilege that, a king has a cupbearer, right? A king has a cupbearer, and that serves him to make sure that his wine is always the best and that it's not poisoned. In this case, Jesus's cup is poisoned. It's poisoned by the world that hates him. They want him to die, right? So such a fascinating, use of phrase here that Jesus picks this cup that I drink, knowing that everybody's thinking this guy's the king. And yeah, we're going to drink the cup of the king because we're going to be sitting on his throne with him, right? This is the question that they ask is, can we sit on your throne with you, right? And so very interesting that he just takes that imagery and immediately puts it to work to communicate something to them that it's difficult. It's difficult. This whole suffering servant, penal substitutionary atonement, penal substitutionary atonement. The penal means penalty, right? That there is a penalty being borne. When you talk about a penal colony, we mean that these people are suffering a penalty, right? People who go to a specific place in a different geography in exile to suffer a penalty. Penal substitutionary atonement, that's how we refer to in the church the forgiveness of sins, that Jesus atones for the sins, the wrath of God against sins. He propitiates sin, which means he bears the sin on our behalf. So that's really what he's talking about. I'm sure you covered that. I think I actually missed 2 weeks in a row because of technical difficulties. So did
Yeah,
you cover that?
I don't know that we actually did talk in detail about these verses. I don't recall, but if we did,
Okay.
repetition is not a bad thing. It's a helpful thing in learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like the way that you presented this. And they would have, as far as baptism, of course, they would have a reference for that because um, presumably there was a point at which they were actually baptizing, right? They were responsible for baptizing others, right? So they would have that sense. Now, they don't have the benefit of what we might know because we know the whole story, the whole cup business, right? For many of us, the idea of drinking the cup, that takes us to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prays that let this cup
Hmm.
pass if possible, right?
Sure.
And
Hmm.
Peter, James, and John, future to this event here, of course, um, they would have known that Jesus prayed that if they could have stayed awake, right? If they could have stayed awake, they would probably have heard him pray that. But of course, they don't know that yet. That hasn't happened in the story at this point. And so, as you brought out, they're thinking kingdom, king, cup, cupbearer. Yeah. So very
And
interesting.
they may even be thinking, like, when you go into a king's courts, you have to get cleaned up, and of course we're going to get cleaned up and to rule,
Yeah.
over the earth as God, has appointed and chosen us to follow His Son, and we have great responsibilities in front of us. So yeah, we're going to get cleaned up, and I'm sure they're thinking in the simplest terms.
Right.
Um, so
Okay. Now I want to jump down to verse 41 here. And again, we may be repeating some of what we talked about before. I just don't remember that we had much discussion about this. But anyway, it says here, it starts off here in verse 41, and when the 10 heard it. And so my impression is that in this event, it's really a moment of Jesus with the 12, and that maybe there's nobody else that's part of this teaching that's gone on. I think it would kind of make sense that
hmm
when Jesus is teaching about his death, well, it says, in fact, it says there, he took again the 12 and began to tell them. So Jesus is his 12 disciples that we think of, or um, are here, and um, so uh, so the 10 heard it. They began to be much displeased with James and John. But Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that they who are accounted to rule over the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and their great ones exercise authority upon them. But so it shall not be among you. But whoever will be great among you shall be your minister, and whoever of you will be the chief shall be servant of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be ministered to, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many." So I think this is a pretty important section or passage here. It tells us much about what Jesus was calling the 12 to become on his behalf, and it maybe even speaks to the church today in maybe in principle form. What would you want to say about these verses, Lucas?
well, when I go over to the Greek, the word he who desires to be first shall be slave of all. Literally, doulos is the word, a manservant or a slave. And then down a little further, the word man did not come to be served, but to serve. It's diakonos, which is where we get our word deacon. Um, he did not come to be served, diakonathenai, and diakonesai, to serve. So it's it's really interesting, of course, that he mentions the Gentiles here, because I think a lot of people think, well, that's the theology of Paul, right? Well, no. Um, there are those in the Gentiles are very much part of this world that Jesus is ministering to, and when they're contrasting, basically saying the way that the Pharisees and the Jews are acting now basically is like Gentiles, like they're lording it over people, and the kingdom of God is going to be different, right? He's almost not even saying. You might think he's saying, well, the Jews, we order our lives differently. It's like, no, the Gentiles uh, lord it over, but then the Jews also lord it over, and the Gentiles are going to be converted too and brought into this um, mentality, the Christ mind, if you will, of being a slave and a servant. Um, so, but yeah, this is really interesting, verse 45, because he's saying that he, the Son of Man, which language we see in um, Daniel and in Ezekiel. Uh, these are it's an Old Testament reference to the ones who are expected. The Son of Man is the expected. He's the Messiah, and the Messiah didn't come to be king and to lord it over. Like, what are you saying? This is quite radical. He came to be a slave. Like, this is does not compute. Like, David was never a slave. Now, you can find an example of somebody who was a slave before they became exalted, and that's Joseph. We go all the way back to Genesis. Joseph was sold into slavery and suffered much, but he was exalted to basically the right hand of Pharaoh.
Right.
Super interesting. They certainly would have a context, but it's not necessarily, he's having to teach them this. This is not necessarily what they're thinking about for themselves at this time.
Right. So this becomes particularly critical for the 12. I guess you could actually say the 11, but the role that they're going to play in um, establishing the church, right, being the foundation stones of the church, with Christ being the chief cornerstone, right, becomes particularly important that they show the servant nature of Christ in the work that they're doing. Um, and so it seems that that's what Christ is instructing them in particular here, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That there's have to be a service even unto death, right? That's actually what it says in Philippians 2, that not only did Jesus take on flesh, but he took on the form of a servant, and that he served even unto death, right? He suffered and served even unto death on the cross. He gave his whole life. Like, this is what you'd expect of a servant. Now, a king would be the kind of guy you'd expect to sit at the back of the army, not at the front of the army. Jesus is literally at the front of the army. He's going into the battle first. He's at the tip of the spear. And that is not what we usually expect, right?
Right.
But that's how God is operating. That's how the God man, is operating.
Yeah. So
He's
yeah,
taking it upon himself.
I think there were moments where George Washington actually went out in front of his men in some of his
Is
battles.
that in the new movie? Is that going to be in the new movie?
I don't know. I
Uh,
don't know. It seems like that was
no.
the case. Um,
Well, yeah, but then there's also those interesting legends about him leading garrisons or whatever he did when he was younger, and getting shot but
Right.
not being wounded. It's very interesting.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, um, okay. So yeah, so this passage, just maybe it's just out of curiosity. Do you, as a pastor, do you take special note of this particular passage? Is it unique to pastors, or is it really for all? So, I mean, I guess it would be for all believers to some extent, right? But
Well, the servant's not greater than the master, right? So unless if you think like somehow you're greater than Jesus, it's not for you, right?
okay, I'll
This is
stop
just
thinking
not
that.
for you. Um, but I think that's certainly a general message. But I preached this message before the presbytery when I came into when I was before they voted on me, right? Which is dangerous, right? Because you're telling them like that you guys aren't all that special. That you're just servants, right? And but I preached it out of. Actually, did I preach it out of? I think I preached out of Mark 10. Yeah, I think I preached this exact same passage for pastors, and it's good for us to be reminded because it's temptation to think you're the answer guys. You're the guys who are, the leaders of the church, and you have a temptation to lord it over. It actually says in Galatians 6:1. Oh no, it's Titus. In Titus 1, it says that the elders shouldn't lord it over the congregation, the people, when they're doing discipline, church discipline. So he uses the same exact language in Titus 1. So yeah, it's definitely for the leaders of the church, but um, only insofar as we're like the leaders, like by example, showing others how to live.
Yeah, that comes to my mind because with well, we used to call them televangelists. I don't know if we still call them that, but these mega church pastors and the productions that they go through and seem to really try to put themselves up as super spiritual pop star type personalities. It seems to fly in the face of what Jesus is teaching right here for what they're doing.
Yeah, I am really concerned about when most churches do like a pastoral search, like what are you looking for? And I've applied to a few churches in the past, and there's questionnaires and there's all sorts of things, and then you come and preach on Sunday, and there's a real sort of performative maybe aspect of it. But you have to wonder, like, are you guys looking for somebody who's like holy and humble? Like, if you got the humble guy, would you pick the more arrogant, like sort
Yeah.
of braggadocious guy over the humble guy? You gotta kind of wonder in most of the churches. So, yeah, this is certainly one that you would want to maybe take a little more seriously when you're picking your next pastor.
Sure,
Um,
sure, yeah. And I guess it is the personality pastor, right? The one that is um, likable and intriguing and provocative and such. I guess the scriptures tell us that it's a congregation essentially that wants their ears tickled, and so they're going for that personality type pastor. So, with these mega churches, maybe the people in the congregation need to look at themselves a little bit. Like like you were saying, what is it that we're looking for in a shepherd for we the flock here? So, um,
Yeah, and sadly, it's a lot of times it's the guy who can tell a really funny story, that just really gets me chuckling on Sunday. Really? Like that's what you want? Maybe you should. I just think about these guys like Mark Driscoll or whatever. It's like the guy goes to a certain point, and then he gets in some sort of scandal because obviously his arrogance has gotten the best of him, he's yelling at his staffers and
Mhm.
like choking them and all sorts of like really bizarre behavior. It's like, how do you think he got there? Well, maybe because people enabled him to act like a superstar instead of a pastor. Is he ever doing? Is he ever going to the hospital and loving people who are unlovable, are like passed out, um, who are you know not looking their best, not wearing their makeup? Is he sitting down with people and helping them, get over their sins and walking them through sanctification process, or is he? If you were to go to your pastor and say, "Hey, I want to invite you over to dinner," I have had pastors, numerous pastors, do this actually. Hey, I want to invite you over to dinner. Oh, that's just not going to work. Like, really? Wow. I mean, and these are good teachers, like
Mhm.
that have said this to me, like men that people very much respect would still act like this. Like they're not personable, and but that's that people consider these the best of the best of what we
Mhm.
have. And it's just like you gotta wonder. Not saying that they're bad people, all of them, but if you're not willing to be humble and lowly, Martin Luther, during the Great Plague, he says, "I'm going to go out and pray with these sick people." Like, would the pastors today bother to do such a thing? What percentage? What percentage would go out and
Well,
risk their lives?
yeah. One thing we know is that some of these alleged pastors who portray themselves as having the gift of healing, and yet they're not going to their local hospital and going into the hospital rooms and healing the people that are there, right? They're only healing those who show up at their big rallies and give money and then come forward, allegedly
That's
healing, I'll
proof
say. Yeah.
proof positive they don't have the gift of healing.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go ahead and read through this last portion of Mark chapter 10. And this is where Jesus heals a blind man. So, starting here in verse 46, and they came to Jericho. And as he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great number of people, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the highway side begging. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. And many charged him, that him there is blind Bartimaeus, that he should hold his peace. But he, blind Bartimaeus, cried the more a great deal, Thou son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called, and they called the blind man, saying to him, Be of good comfort, rise, he calls you. And he, blind Bartimaeus, casting away his garment, rose and came to Jesus. And Jesus answered and said to him, What will you that I should do to you? The blind man said to him, Lord, that I may receive my sight. And Jesus said to him, Go, your faith has made you whole. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus in the way. All right.
Hmm.
So Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem here. He's heading to his final week, his Passion Week, right? And so um, Jericho would be north of, kind of northeast of Jerusalem, I guess. Uh, so um,
Mm-hmm.
he's uh, he's on that way, and he encounters this man. Now, I'll let you talk about it however you want to talk about it. But it seems to me that this may be the only person that is healed by Jesus where we get the name, the actual name of the person. I don't know if I'm accurate in that, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember. It was just the leper or the man with the withered hand, right? Um, Peter's mother-in-law. I don't know that we ever got an actual name before. It's interesting to me that, not that it's, I don't know how significant it is, but it's interesting that not only do we get the name of this person, but we get the name of his father as well. Um, and
Was probably a later disciple, or became a significant disciple, which is why he would be named. And that his genealogy or relatives also named.
Okay, I'll accept that. All right, so go ahead and talk your way through this passage, Lucas.
Yeah, so Jericho, interesting place. If anybody remembers, but I'll throw it out here for good measure. Jericho was this cursed place where nobody was supposed to live anymore after Jericho was destroyed. Um, so
Wait, wait,
it's
wait,
kind of
wait.
a
Is this where Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho? Is this
this.
that Jericho?
There's no other Jericho that I'm aware
All
of.
right. I won't go into
Um,
the song, but all right, good. That gives us
so
historical context for sure.
context, yeah. So the Israelites came across the Jordan, so it's pretty close to the Jordan, and it would be the first city of the Canaanites that was conquered. Um, so nobody was supposed to build here, but clearly there's people living here. Probably rebuilt, since the days of Joshua. And a bit of in my mind, and maybe even in the Jewish mind, a cursed place, like a place where there was not supposed to be a rebuilding. So he is a cursed man in a sense because he's blind. He's born blind, and maybe folks would have considered him cursed, from being born in sin. Or who knows what kind of parentage he had. We know of Timaeus, but you know, um, there's certainly some questions that people would have had there, like why are you blind in the first place? There's other stories where that question sort of comes to the fore, and he says something interesting here. Apparently, in the Greek, there's no. It's actually not Jesus of Nazareth. It's Jesus the Nazarene. Let me find the. Is it 48?
47, maybe.
47. Yeah, it says Nazarenos, not Nazareth. So that's kind of interesting. Little detail here. I don't know that anybody calls him Jesus, the Nazarene, up to this point. Um, but he is is blind, certainly, but he has really sort of an interesting insight that this guy who's a Nazarene is the son of David, and he is qualified to have mercy. It's sort of like it's a confession of his inability. It's a confession of his need, his great need, and obviously he can't see Jesus, but he's hearing, the people around are talking, and he can hear that there's quite a buzz. Jesus is in town, and so this is his chance. And so he says it again. He cries out all the more, even after in 48, the people are trying to shut him up. Um, which is it's interesting little note. There's other scenes where people are bringing their friends to Jesus to get healed, but here they're trying to get him to be quiet for whatever reason. It's kind of a funny detail. Um, Instead of like taking him by the hand and helping him to go to Jesus, like everybody else is like flocking to Jesus, trying to touch him. Maybe this is because they're in Judea. They're further south. It's no longer Galilee. Maybe there's a bit of a hardness. That warning for him to be quiet is really fascinating. Maybe the dual the contrast between being from Nazareth but being a son of David. The good Pharisees would realize this isn't matching up. Jesus is not supposed to. The Messiah is not supposed to be from Nazareth. He's not supposed to be Nazarene. So, son of David, have mercy on me. And it's interesting. One of the commentaries I was reading says that he lacks eyesight, but he has an insight that he expects Jesus, who's from Nazareth, to be the Messiah, which is an insight that seemingly like nobody else can see. right? That this guy who's from Nazareth, he's a Nazarene, he is the long expected, awaited King of glory, right? You're the Holy One of God, the demons say, right? So the blind can see it, the demons can see it, um, but others can't. And so it's really fascinating. Actually, one of the it says that there's a similar expression used in Judges 16:17. Um, the Nazarite of, which is Samson. He's called the Nazarite of God. So it's maybe that's kind of what this gentleman is saying, is that, I'm in a certain sort of a bondage, to sin, kind of like Samson was in bondage, and his eyes were gouged out, and he's crying out to God, in his final moment of desperation. God, give me back my strength. This is what Samson says, so that I can serve you. And maybe that's, kind of the imagery that we see here. And maybe Bartimaeus, maybe my initial observation of Bartimaeus could be significant and named because he does become a significant disciple and a great servant, just like Samson was given his sight or strength back. He wasn't given his sight back, he was given his strength back. Remember, um, his eyes were gouged out,
Mhm.
Samson. So, yeah, very, very evocative encounter here, and definitely makes you wonder, how much are you supposed to read into all these little details? It's tempting, but probably warranted, because where do you see, all these names mean something? All these little appellations, Jesus, you're from Nazareth. Jesus, you're the son of David. All these things are significant. So Jesus commands him to be called. They call the blind man, saying, "Be of good cheer, rise. He's calling you." So now the tables have turned. Everybody's like, "Oh, hey, let's do what he says. Be of good cheer." And we were trying to keep you away from him at first, but now let's be of good cheer. And so he throws aside his garment, rose, and came to Jesus. Um, and Jesus answers and says, "What do you want me to do for you?" And he says, "Teacher, Rabboni, my teacher, Rabboni," right? Um, he could say Rabbi, but he says Rabboni, um, a little bit more intimate, maybe, or a statement of faith, like, "You are my teacher, and I know that you have the power to restore my sight, that I can receive my sight." So Jesus says, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. And can God heal us without our faith? Absolutely. It's God's healing that does it. Does Jesus not know what he's saying? Like, I'm the Almighty God, and it's me that's healing you. Everybody knows it's Jesus that's healing him, right? Nobody's in doubt about that. That Jesus is the power, the Almighty One. But Jesus is teaching us something about faith, how instrumental it is. That his faith is shown by his rising, his throwing aside his garment, coming to Jesus with a great need. This is what we should do, right? We should come in faith. We should throw aside all worldly cares, all things that are um, maybe protecting us, things that are valuable to us, and give up the whole world, even, so that we can have Jesus Christ. That's faith. Faith is an active thing, and this is much debated and bandied about. The Roman Catholics say, "Well, we're not saved by faith alone." Well, the Reformed view is that faith is always active. Go read Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith. All of the people in the Hall of Faith, by faith, Abraham did this. By faith, Noah did this. Faith is something that's always alive and active, right? So it's not like a magic substance. It's not. It's actually God who's making you well. But faith is that in this case, uh, not blind faith. There's no such thing as blind faith. There's really only active faith. There's active faith that this man can know where Jesus is from and still see him as the son of David. It's actually it's a seeing faith. It's seeing the truth of your situation, the truth of who God is. I think is what faith is. It's not. There's. I really hate that term blind faith. That's such a overused, and I don't think there's any blindness about it. It's when you truly see, when the light comes into your life, and the darkness, you know, recedes. That's faith. So don't talk to me about blind faith. I don't like that.
So this title that he uses here, Son of David. Um, I don't recall that we have read that title of Jesus, at least in the Gospel of Mark, previous to this. I
To
may,
the to this point.
yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I don't know that we have.
Um, so that would at least as yeah. I did a quick search on Grok. Grok says that this is the first place it shows up in the Gospel of Mark is here, and then apparently it
Hmm.
will show up again later in Mark. But um, Um, in fact, Grok says here Mark uses the title more sparingly than Matthew, which has it many times. And I guess that would make sense given what we understand or who we understand the audience to be for each of those gospels, right? If Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience, right, then
Yeah,
that son of David becomes significant for them. And Matthew
could be.
also wanting
Yeah,
to um, show the kingly nature of Jesus, right? That he's a in line of the kings, right?
for sure. Yeah, he's in the line of the kings. He's a part of this messianic kingly expectation that the throne of David there will not fail to be. What is it? Second Samuel. Um, there will not cease to be Second Samuel 7, the promise of God, this covenant promise, the Davidic covenant. There will not cease to be a son of David on the throne, right? Which clearly there has been, right? Because now who's the king? King Herod. He's an Edomite, right? He's not even a Jew.
Right.
So this is very much an expectation they want. They don't want the Romans. They don't want these Edomites. They want a Jewish king again, and of course you want a Jewish king because he's going to rule over the Jews better. And I think what you're seeing here is that I'm going to use a word here, propinquity. Uh, propinquity, is that an English word? Well, it should be if it's not. Um, that they have neared Jerusalem. They're getting close to Jerusalem. Jericho's on the road, just not too far from Jerusalem. They're now in Judea, and this all the terms maybe of the earlier ministry around Israel and dealing with these Samaritans and in the north and around um, the Sea of Tiberias, Galilee. Like there's less of a Jewish messianic expectation. Now this is where the messianic expectation like is explicitly Jewish. And yeah, Matthew using it more sparing or using it more routinely because it's more of a Judean context probably. But here the or Judean perspective, a Jewish perspective. But here you have a movement from the first 8 chapters being a Galilean ministry and the last 8 chapters being a move towards a particular Judean ministry. Um, so that's what I would say is going on here. Yeah, it's interesting, it's notable, it's significant, but that's probably what Mark is showing us is that the terms differ and these people have a slightly different perspective. I think everything here, warning him to be quiet, his use of the Son of David, in contrast to Jesus of Nazareth,
Mm.
um, all of this is significant.
So I went to my Webster's 1828. I brought that up here in propinquity. There's the word in Webster's 1828. So you are
Oh,
allowed to
good.
use that word. It is
Nearness. It's nearness.
yes,
The nearness to Jerusalem
yeah.
is changing everything.
But Webster approves, so we can use that word. um,
Perfect.
okay, this will be maybe trivial. I don't know, but it's interesting the details that come into these stories, right? So, and I don't want to get inappropriate about trying to read too much into details, but it is interesting that in verse 50, Mark wants us to know that Bartimaeus cast away his garment, rose, and came to Jesus. Do you see any significance there? Or is it just a detail that tells us that's what happened? I don't know. I, I mean, I think
Yeah, I
you can
mean,
make something up about that's him casting off his the sinful nature being cast off, right? And he's now coming into newness
of
of life. You
course.
could, but I don't know if
Read
that's if is that reading into the passage and not.
the quadriga. Well, this is something people don't probably fully appreciate. There's a fourfold interpretive approach called the quadriga that you can use for every passage. And in the Middle Ages, they way overdid it on the let's find spiritual significance in the tiny little details. And so they'll take the most like the simple detail of a narrative and let's say this is him throwing aside sin or whatever. It's all figurative and metaphor. Everything's metaphorical. If Jesus eats an olive, that's a sign of this or that. And that's not to say that it couldn't happen, that God doesn't use little details to communicate, like little things, little references.
Mhm.
I think there's a danger in flattening out the gospel too much and not having enough detail, because I think that God is amazing and the Bible's amazing. In the words of the secular Professor Rosaria Butterfield, when she read the Bible, she saw these details and it blew her mind in such a way. She's like, this isn't just good literature, this is like masterful literature. So I don't want to take away from the Bible that it's masterful literature and God can be communicating wonderful depths here. But this is why we adhere to a grammatical historical approach, which is basically just bare bones. Like, let's just take the simple message that God's giving us here. That this man, if you're sitting somewhere, you know, um, outside of Jericho, this is where it says he was out of Jericho. There was a great multitude there, and this guy's begging by the side of the road. Probably doesn't own a whole lot. Like, this could be all he has in the world, so he could just be, the simple reading could be he's just throwing aside all of his worldly possessions to chase after that one great hope. So that's what we should do, I think. But yeah, it's not necessary
Yeah,
to go way overboard with the interpretive
and
spiritualization.
and there are those who definitely do that, right? They're looking for some great spiritual truth in every phrase and such, and yet um, not to in any way trivialize, but I think oftentimes if individuals would come to the Bible and read it in a manner similar to how they would read any other book, let the narrative speak to you, just read it as you said, do a simple reading of it. I mean, we're told that God's word is powerful, so just let the word do its work and read the passage in that simple way. And probably as we grow and mature, we come to understand greater and greater truths from the passages that we read. But yeah, so
Yeah.
I
Well,
like the
I
idea
think
of
our
understanding it as it is literature as well. And so you're telling a story and you tell things that happen that make it real, you know.
yeah, yeah. I'm very much people tell me my preaching is more literary, meaning I look at what is trying to be communicated and I try to communicate that. And um, it's usually a very simple message, and sometimes people can get lost in all these, all these little machinations of interpretation, and really miss the overall picture. That this is a man who comes with a profound faith, who sees more than most people around him, and but are these little details? I think they're touching, and are they important? Absolutely, they're touching, because I think we need to do this more. We've really lost our imaginative capacity by watching, I believe, too many movies. When you watch uh, lots of graphic scenes that are presented for you in a dramatic way, with special effects and those sorts of things, I think it ruins a bit of the imaginative ability in man. And so when you read this, I would encourage you to use your imagination to paint the picture, and don't just read words. Don't just skip over, now they came to Jericho, great multitude, and all this other stuff, sat by the road begging. Like, really, just like every little picture, like try to paint for yourself what's going on. And I think that'll be, there's some beautiful pictures here in the Bible, lots of them, lots of beautiful pictures. And
Yeah,
if you can make it as colorful in your imagination as possible, making sure every phrase has a place, in the construct you're building in your mind, I think it's going to help your memorization. There's some like classical education approaches here. It's going to be easier for you to memorize it, remember what happened, remember even the details, because um, if you just read it, as words, and you don't really get captivated by it. Don't let your imagination get captivated by it. I think you're ruining what you could get out of it.
sure. And speaking of then details, at the end of this story, we get an interesting detail that it tells us that Bartimaeus followed Jesus in the way. And we know in other instances, um, well, I think of the demoniac and the Gadarenes who wanted to
Mm,
follow Jesus, and Jesus told him, "No, you
right.
have to stay here." I don't know that this was in Mark's gospel, but there's the story of the 10 lepers that Jesus heals, and it's only one who comes back to thank Jesus. The other nine just kind of go their way, apparently. Um, and so there's all different kinds of scenarios that happen after Jesus has healed. I mean, there are some that he strictly tells them, "Don't tell anybody what just happened," right? And so it's interesting here that the detail, very simply stated, is that Bartimaeus, I take from this, became a follower of Jesus. That I don't think it's I don't think it's saying he was like a puppy that just started walking after Jesus, but the faith that he had, as exhibited by his calling out to Jesus, is fully activated, and he is now a follower of Jesus. I don't know, in the way. I don't know how significant that is, because um, is it in the book of Acts, or that the followers of it is called the way, followers of the way? Is that, am I making
Mm-hmm.
that up, or is that
Yeah, no, that's true. It's called The Way. His followers, is it? I can't remember what. It's later in Acts, but maybe chapter 20. I'm not sure. But Hodo, I mean, just means uh, the road. On
okay?
the road. Followed him on the road. Um, I don't know that the reference in Acts is any different. I have a cross reference here. Let me. I guess I can look it up.
um, but this would suggest what you said at the start about Bartimaeus, that he becomes a
I did. I
true
said that at
follower
the
of
start.
Jesus, right?
See, I was right. Yeah.
Careful now, don't become
It's,
one of those megachurch pastors. No.
in case
Um,
anyone doubted me. Yeah. Well, I don't have a megachurch, so I need, all the.
Hey,
reinforcing I can get.
a mega church is not just mega because it's big with a lot of people attending. The true mega church is the church that faithfully teaches God's word. Um, okay, so one other thing I'll say here is we're wrapping up in chapter 10. This story doesn't appear in Mark, but we're in Jericho, and many people who are familiar with the Gospels may think of Jericho as the place of Jesus encountering Zacchaeus, and so that would be, um, uh, I think, at the around the same time as this happened with um, healing of Bartimaeus. Um, Now, just to try to catch you off guard or whatever, um,
Of course.
uh, if I go to the harmony of the Gospels here, yeah, so it's in Matthew. Matthew says, "Behold, two blind men sitting by the wayside." Mark says just Bartimaeus, and Luke says a certain blind man sat by the way. So let's, if you're willing to talk about this, I don't know if you're not prepared, maybe, but because some people would look at this and say,
It's
"Oh, well, you
fine.
see, there's contradictions in the Gospels. That you
Hmm.
can't rely upon these
Oh
narratives.
yeah.
They're telling different stories." So maybe speak to that just a
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah. Well, just because one gospel says there's one doesn't mean there couldn't have been two.
Oh, well,
And
that's
so that's
simple.
the simple answer, right? There was at least one, right? So that's there's really nothing more to it than that. I like reading harmonies. They also say the same thing at the demoniac in Mark 5. In one account there's two demoniacs and two guys living in the caves, and one in Mark there's only one. So Mark is clearly choosing to tell the story his way. These are written by men. We affirm that there's human agency in the writing. God uses human authors. It's written in their perspective. It's written with their language, even their speaking habits, as they would have spoken, and so we have no problem affirming that. In fact, that's why the four gospels, if you were trying to avoid any discrepancies, you would not want four gospels, because there would have been the concern that there would be some you know conflict between the different guys' stories. But most of the when I was in college, I uh, read an article by Lessing, who's a German Enlightenment scholar, the 24 contradictions in Scripture. And I was unaware that there were any of these kind of little, and that's usually what he would pick up, was like a little discrepancy. Was there one woman at the tomb, two women at the tomb, or were there any women at the tomb? Why are they left out over here? And so that was sort of like the real nitpicking that the scholars, as we call them, I don't know what's so scholarly about them. They can't read very well if they can't figure this stuff out. But that's the kind of stuff, and it did disturb my faith for a while. I never heard that there was any discrepancies or any sort of variation, and I think it's good for young people to realize reading a harmony can be good for you. It can help you to be already prepared to give an answer for these kinds of questions. So there's no, I mean, there's nothing to see here. There's
Except
nothing to see here.
two
Move,
blind
move along,
men.
move along. Two blind men,
Yeah.
one blind man. So,
Well, right. You think about Mark specifically mentioning Bartimaeus, and I don't know, it may have been in speaking in terms of the human agency. I mean, I think ultimately the answer is that these words are divinely inspired, and this is the way that God chose that these words would be written, right? But from
mm-hmm.
the human agency aspect, it could be very meaningful to the audience that Mark is writing to that he tells this story about Bartimaeus specifically rather than just generally,
Mm-hmm.
as Matthew does about two blind men sitting by the
Blind
wayside.
guys.
So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
that
You
seems to
know,
be
my
well.
one of my Old Testament professors, and he did our. It was funny because he did our one of our New Testament classes, I think. Um, but he gave us his view of Mark and some of the New Testament Gospels. Each He encouraged us to read each of these books, each of these Gospels as a standalone. Yes, it can be helpful to go and read the harmony and do the sort of cross reference to get like sort of a timeline. I think it can really help for establishing a timeline. But if you're just reading it as a story, not as a timeline, uh, don't bother doing the cross reference, trying to find out the story in the other one. That's what Calvin does in his commentaries, which is kind of irritating for me because I want Calvin to say, well, this is what Mark is saying. John Calvin just does a harmony in his commentaries, which is fine. It's fine. It's what he wanted to do. That's fine. But I really like the approach. You take Mark's message. What is Mark's message? You know, Mark's interested in telling you about the gospel. Mark's interested in telling you who Jesus is and what his gospel is. What does it mean the kingdom is here? If you could just really focus on what Mark is trying to communicate, not what Matthew's trying to communicate, Luke something different. Matthew and Luke give different genealogies from different perspectives. Note the differences. Like don't just try to homogenize everything. Like milk, right? You mix up the fat and the cream together. Like let them be their own gospel and focus on what's unique about them and really think just about what Mark is saying in his perspective. And I think you'll really benefit next time you read through each of these gospels.
Good. Okay, as we wrap up tonight, since we are at a point where we need to finish, let me switch us to our bird's eye view here, and I'll point out where we're at. So here you can see the word Jericho. This is the conversion of Zacchaeus, which we didn't read about in Mark. And then here on this, it says the two blind men, clearly a Matthew fan, the bird's eye view, but this would have been the story we just read.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll note that that's at number 65, and then there's a number 66, and then a number 67, and then number 68 is the triumphal entry. And I believe that's the way Mark 11 begins, is with the triumphal entry. So that's where we're going next. If we scroll down here to the numbers and what they mean, 66 is the 27th parable, the 10 pounds. So apparently that's when that teaching happens. 67 is Christ arrives at Bethany. Now, Mark, I don't think is going to mention that because I think Mark 11 just starts with the triumphal entry into
Mm-hmm. Right.
Jerusalem. And that triumphal entry into Jerusalem, if we look at it's kind of in this column right here, and if we scroll up, that puts us on Sunday of the final week, the Passion Week. And so this is really getting to the climax of the story that Mark has been walking us through. And so that would be the plan for next episode, would be to start that final week of Jesus' life. So we're getting to the real pinnacle, right? This is the whole purpose of the obedience of Christ as he's walked these days that we've followed through Mark to this point, to come to um, this last week and come to the culmination of his work here on earth.
They're entering the promised land that just came through Jericho. So
Ah,
it's going to be great. It's
all
exciting.
right. Excellent. Okay. So, yeah, thanks for being a part of this episode, and do the whole like and subscribe and share with others. Leave a comment, ask a question. I'm sure you can tell the way Pastor Lucas speaks about the Gospel of Mark and the Bible and understanding it and applying it. He would love to have a conversation with you about any questions that you would have regarding the Bible, the Christian faith. And so please do so. Please shoot us a question, and I promise you that Pastor Lucas, Pastor David will get in touch with you and carry on that conversation with you. Lord willing, next week we'll be back for another episode, and we'll continue exploring the Sketchbook of Christ as we enter into the final week of Jesus' life here on earth.